It has been fun to be on that committee, and I'll tell you, it was really funny when I'm sitting on the dais and we're having our first hearing, and one of the members of the Texas legislature leans over and says, "Who are you? And which district do you come from?" And I said, "Actually, I'm in Utah." And I had to try to explain that. But I don't have beans in my chili, just so you know. It's an honor for me to be here with you, and I did have the opportunity to work on the First Step Act, but the real story is very different than that. Let me tell you, last night I walked my beautiful daughter down the aisle and gave her away to a wonderful man. Thank you. She worked she got her master's in social work at Boston College. She worked as a victim advocate, and she met this very handsome, charismatic police detective, who also served on SWAT. And I never thought she would marry, a street gorilla like this, but it turns out he's phenomenal, and he's brilliant, and he is just this amazing, amazing guy. So our family is steeped in criminal justice. My father was a peace officer in LA, there during the Watts riots. My family has suffered and been victims of crime. I have 4 older sisters. 3 of my sisters were raped. 2 were date raped when they were in high school. 1 was kidnapped and raped in college. So I knew my life, I was going to put bad guys in jail. And I was going to be involved in the criminal justice system. My dad and I drove around the campus looking for the vehicle. My sister said that she was afraid for her life when they talked about where they were going to dispose of her body. But for the grace of God, they opened the door to throw some trash into the gutter, and she kicked the seat and ran for her life. And she made it, and she had a quarter to call on a payphone and called my father, and we went up there. I was 12 years old. So here we are, we fast forward. We're now in a time in which we know that the criminal justice system has a lot of issues. And you have champions of the criminal justice system. You heard from Senator Mike Lee. Mike Lee and I have been friends for years, went to law school together. Our fathers were roommates together. His wife, Sharon, has bossed me around as much as she has Mike. It's a small community in Utah. But we worked our first few jobs together, and we worked as federal prosecutors together. And we knew that there was also, while we wanted to be very, very tough on crime, and I'm going to come back to that and what that really means, we also knew that there were issues with the criminal justice system. There were problems with it. One of the most memorable cases I ever had was a case in which I charged a young woman with stealing a firearm. That's a federal offense. And I was recognized for my firearms prosecutions by Attorney General John Ashcroft and President George Bush, who would later make me U.S. Attorney. But I charged this young woman with this firearm offense, and the defense attorney called me up. I'll never forget, her name was Rebecca, and she said, "Hey, Brett, I'm going to try to talk you out of bringing this case." I said, "Why would you do that? She stole the firearm. I got her. She's going to go for 5 years, federal prison." She said, "Will you meet with me?" I said, "Sure." Turns out she had laid out a case before me, and she showed me how this young woman had stolen the firearm to protect herself because she was trying to get out of a gang. And the gang had threatened her and her brother, and she had hid in the basement with a gun that she had stolen from a neighbor. Now, violation of the law, yes, but I had discretion, prosecutorial discretion, so I could make a decision. And I made the decision to not prosecute that case. and it was appropriate. But it was not a blanket decision that applied across the board to everybody in a particular crime. Ed Meese, the former Attorney General, said that he used to call and congratulate prosecutors when they turned down a case because he knew that they were exercising their discretion and they were remembering that it is important to prosecute, it is important to also be able to analyze a case and not bring a case, which sometimes is difficult. Well, we had a period of time in which to be tough on crime, what was the solution? What was the solution if you wanted to be tough in crime from Reagan until just a few years ago? It was to prosecute a lot and to put them away for a long period of time. And so we had legislators, right, really well-meaning legislators like my friend Chip Roy, who were sitting in the Congress and they would send the message, I am going to be tough on crime. And they only had two solutions. The two solutions were create more crimes that we could go after somebody and lengthen the sentence. And that was going to send a message that we were tough on crime. Well, I'm here to tell you, I took the role of executive director of Right on Crime at TPPF because I don't want any more victims like my sisters. And I want to lower the crime rate. So I've spent 25 years looking at the criminal justice system. And I'll tell you who's not right about what they're doing. The criminal justice system cannot survive if you will not enforce the law. It cannot survive, and you cannot create peace and safety in your communities if you are a liberal woke prosecutor who says, I will not prosecute all of these crimes. My mother, 82 years old, called me up and she says the same thing. For 14 minutes, almost every day, she will rail against Joe Biden. She will say how he deserves the belt. She will say things like, if I was with him, I would slap him. Things like that. She's 82 and she's dizzy almost all the time, but she knows she could take Joe Biden. She also asked me, why is it so bad right now? The crime is rising. And I said, let's look at it. You have woke prosecutors who are now afraid because they've injected race into every aspect of our life to prosecute neutrally, regardless of race, the laws that are in existence. And you have this reaction against that very tough on crime period of time where they passed many, many laws and they lengthened sentences and they decided, okay, we will allow everybody to get out. No bail in New York. And how has that worked? How did it work in Waukesha? The irony of all of this is if you'll take the politics out and you'll do research and you'll use data and the best practices of what's going on in many conservative communities across this country, it's not difficult. You can lower the crime rate by focusing on things like rehabilitation. You can focus on things, simple measures. You take a prison system and you simply add more visitation or more phone calls with family, and they have charted recidivism going down. So we can make changes to the criminal justice system without these obnoxious prosecutors and political leaders who are saying, we're not going to prosecute a whole blanket of crime. So when I talk to my 82-year-old mother and I say, look, you have communities that said they were not going to prosecute. You had riots where they didn't prosecute. You had burnings of cities where they just showed it on the TV and told us it was something different than it was. And you wonder, Mom, why there is a generation of people believing that they can commit more crime? That's why. So at TPPF and Right on Crime, our focus is going to be develop and pass legislation that lowers crime rates. That's what we're going to do. And it might be that we also do things to help actually root out problems like fentanyl that's coming through, like immigration crime, like the things that we see happening to our country. As far as I know, as I wrap this up, we're the only organization that has said we will not pursue a policy that jeopardizes community safety or forgets victims like my sisters. So with that, thank you for your support. We look forward to working for you all in the future. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brett. I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. I know that Clint is walking around the room, and even Erica with their microphone, so we can get, we got some right over here to our left. Miss Erica's coming right around your shoulder, sir.
I did work in law enforcement at one point. I was a jailer to start. One of the things that I learned early on, noticed early on, was that people who've been incarcerated have a different way of communicating, a different value system, and an entirely different outlook on life than other people that I would work with and things like that. And it led me to understand that recidivism is bred into the system that we have, but also into the act of crime itself. So what you're talking about is an incredibly complex problem that has been exacerbated by, as you said, politicians who want to make quick, cheap points, and on both sides, conservative and liberal, one swinging the pendulum one way, one swinging it the other. And what are your thoughts on how to stabilize the pendulum and then go towards rehabilitation, which historically has never been successful in the thousands of years that people have been incarcerated?
Yeah, great question. We make a priority where we put our money, right? There's three things in the Department of Justice that are written down as the mission of the Department of Justice. It is punishment, deterrence, and the last one is rehabilitation. But the Department of Justice has basically indicated they were not going to participate in rehabilitation, which left just the Bureau of Prisons to do it. But if you take states and you look at some of the states out there, there are prison systems who have identified a reward system that is capable of giving better work experience to these individuals. And we've now learned through data that work is the biggest indicator. If they can get a job on the outside, it's the greatest indicator of lowering recidivism and the crime rate. So if we'll focus on that, and I'm encouraged by companies like J.P. Morgan who have said, look, there's a labor shortage. We're going to bring on individuals who have formerly been incarcerated, and they've now been doing it, and they've been doing it for years. So we're focusing in many states on opportunities for nonviolent offenders, for example, to clean their records more quickly in order to get jobs or to give them other opportunities to be employed, because once they do, that employment is the thing that will drive down the crime rates. But as long as we continue to put big barriers to getting jobs when they get out, we will have that problem.
Excellent question. Thank you so much for asking. I think we do have time for one more question. And I know I did see a couple hands raised earlier, unless you just covered all the information.
I answered all four of them.
That's right. That's right. Oh.
That's why I stopped eating it.
Are we figuring it out? Oh, over here. What can we help you, strange sir? No one knows who you are.
I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Texas.
I wasn't going to let my former Senate Judiciary colleague just walk away off the stage without a question. For those who don't know, we work together on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He for Senator Hatch, I for Senator Cornyn.
Yeah.
Brett, in all seriousness, you and I were talking about this briefly here at the table. We've got significant crime increases going on that's not connected to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
But what would be your suggestion for a strong position for conservatives to take in an environment where we want to address the issues you just outlined, but we need to be addressing fentanyl, gangs, cartels, the danger on the streets, Austin defunding cops, those sorts of things? What would be your thoughts on how we address that?
Yeah, I will tell you that. So first, if you're not going to secure the border, you're not going to secure the influx of fentanyl, and we know that, and it has to be done. When I was U.S. Attorney, President Bush made me U.S. Attorney, we were Utah, but it was a race from Arizona and Texas and New Mexico into the interior states, right? And so we worked as states together to try to shut that down, but we had the leadership in Washington, D.C. believing that that was the right decision. So we definitely have to change that aspect of it. But states need to be looking at fentanyl itself, and they need to be addressing the issue. Some don't have statutes that properly deal with the seriousness of it. And that's appropriate. Death results so much faster with fentanyl than it does any other. Alaska, for example, Doug Deese and I were talking to the governor of Alaska. He said, what are some things that other states are doing? And so we outlined some enhancements that are going with the fentanyl prosecutions. And those are appropriate. We can't be an organization that wants public safety and not also suggest ways to be tougher on crime that is killing some of our people in the streets. But at the same time, if you want to lower that type of crime, you also can't ignore the fact that we have a mental illness problem in our facilities, and we have a rehabilitation problem, the drug dependency problem that we have been trying to deal with by just incarcerating them longer. And the reality is 95% of all of those that are incarcerated are getting out. And so what shape are they in when they get out has to be our focus. And so Representative Roy is, he's a phenomenal big brain guy that I've loved working and watching, and he's right. We can't send a message, defund the police, and allow anarchy in streets, and then expect that we are going to be able to shut down criminal operations like gangs and cartels from acting in this country. So it's got to be a change at the leadership level nationally, and a change in each and every state, that we start to identify ways to deal with some of the scourges that are coming in. We would not have the problems that we do if we had better leadership in those roles. It wouldn't be perfect, and then we would start to make changes where we can start to facilitate greater training, greater education while they are incarcerated, so that we can lower that crime rate.
Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you so much for Congressman Roy for asking the question. How about one more round of applause for Brett Tolman, everyone?